We're on. We're on.
Are you not starting this off?
Oh, I thought you were. I'm not allowed to host after what happened last time, I thought.
You host all the time. You're the one with the controller. I figured you were the one that was doing the hosting.
I don't have any arms. How can I control and host without any arms?
Welcome to the Who
so I guess Kyle's going to jump. Okay, Kyle's hosting. I mean, if that's how it's going to be, wow.
Well, that's interesting.
This is how we start things off here in 2014 with a bang.
It is. This is high quality television as normal. Okay, well, I guess hi everybody. I didn't know I was going to be hosting, so I guess I'll just spit some words out here. I'm Galen Clavio. We're back with Hoops HD's Bracket Racket show, the more or less regular Sunday night item that we have going for you. We're joined, of course, by David Griggs and also by Kyle Lamb. How are you gentlemen doing this evening?
I'll speak for myself because I don't want to speak for David, but I'm doing well, thank you. I am not banned from any college facilities this year, and I'm ready to go. But David, well, he's another story.
Is being banned the same as just being asked to not come back? I still say that I'm not actually banned from some of these places.
I think you should check that out by trying to go back and see if they'll let you in.
Well, if I do that, they won't let me in.
Well, then you're banned. Okay, there's.
I have it on good authority that when local jurisdictions actually legislate that you are not allowed on the premises, that is being banned.
Well, never. Chad's supposed to be cleaning that up. That's why he can't be with us tonight.
It's probably a reason why he hasn't cleaned it up either. Anyway, obviously not a whole lot's gone on so far. We've got a few things to talk about. We won't go tremendously long tonight or anything like that, but we did want to talk about a few things that have transpired over the course of this first 3 days of the college basketball season. And, really we should probably talk about the surprises, and there haven't been that many of them. But there have been a few games that, frankly, did not go the way that people thought they would. And actually, we just got done with one of those, and maybe we'll talk about that to start with. I believe our first ranked team falling on the day or on the season as Harvard loses in Boston to Holy Cross, and a bit of a surprise, frankly. I mean, maybe not the hugest of surprises, in as much as while Harvard was pretty well regarded, Holy Cross isn't an awful team, but still not exactly what the Crimson were expecting in this game.
No, I actually was kind of surprised. More so, I guess I was more surprised at how well I thought Holy Cross played. I really thought this was going to be a middle-of-the-road team in the Patriot, which is looking very 15, 16 seedish coming into the year. American appears to be the best team. And Holy Cross went out there and really played well. Now, Harvard didn't play their best game, but I was still a little shocked that I was surprised. Frankly, I was. I know it's a regional game. I know it's a rivalry game. It's not going to be the biggest upset of the year by far. And in fact, if it happens in a couple of weeks, it's probably just a footnote because of everything else going on. But I was not expecting it.
Kyle, it is kind of a kick in the nuts to Harvard's at-large chances already. I mean, losing a neutral site game against a Holy Cross team that might not break into the Ken Palm or RPI top 100. That's a tough nut to swallow at this stage.
Kyle is just on fire tonight. I mean,
my connection cut out for the last 10 seconds of your comment, but I got the gist of what you were saying. Yeah, the thing is, I know on our email thread you mentioned that we have a Tommy Amaker in progress, and I looked, I'm like, oh boy, this is going to end very badly.
Yeah.
For those that haven't caught this, we have when you're a coach that has a verb attached to your name with our group, it's not very good. And Tommy Amaker is one of about a half a dozen coaches where we have that attached. And sure enough, he didn't disappoint today. But you're right. I mean, this is a very bad early season loss for them, and they're a team that just doesn't have enough chances against quality teams to be able to withstand this kind of a loss. So it really gives them a
not
if they want to get an at-large bid. I mean, obviously, right. If they did it last year and they win the Ivy, then it doesn't matter. But there's been situations where they haven't won the Ivy before, and this is where problems start to come in.
Right, and if
Yeah.
they win the Ivy, and the thing about it is, since there is no conference tournament, I almost think for a team like Harvard, there's less incentive to play their way inside the bubble because either they're going to win the automatic bid, which means finishing first in the Ivy, or they're not going to finish first in the Ivy. And if you don't finish first in the Ivy, it means you lost multiple times to teams that aren't very good. I know Yale is decent. I know Columbia is decent, but they're decent by Ivy League standards. They're not even NIT caliber teams, I don't think. Do you guys? So you're talking about losing multiple games to sub NIT teams.
Right.
So, and again, it hurts, but at the same time, it's like, oh, well, it's just an out-of-conference game. It hurts their seed in the NCAA tournament.
That's a good point. No, it does do that. So that occurred, and that was our first top 25 upset, as I mentioned. But we've also had a few other what you would classify as bad losses. And Kyle, I don't know if you saw this one, but not the greatest start to the Kim Anderson era at Mizzou. They lose to Missouri, Kansas City, 69-61.
Well, and it's not just Missouri. I mean, we've got an Ebola outbreak in the SEC so far this year.
Yes, that was just the most readily apparent one. Obviously, Ole Miss also lost to Charleston Southern, which that's not a good way to carry out your business either.
Yeah, especially when Tennessee and Georgia, had some convincing losses on the same night. It was not a good start for the SEC, but I think with Missouri, it's not going to happen overnight. I thought maybe they'd be competitive this year. The way the first two games have gone for Mizzou, it's probably going to be a long season for them, even in a weak league.
Well, they were competitive against UMKC. I mean, they made them work for it, sort of.
And they had a competitive win today against Valpo. But I really do think Kim Anderson is going to get that program turned around. And yes, I realize they went to the NCAA tournament against Frank Haith, but nonetheless, it needs turned around. But it's not going to happen this year. It doesn't look like. But yeah, that was a bad loss for Missouri, and just the SEC has been as gloriously bad so far this year as we thought it would be.
It's worse than I thought it would be.
I mean, obviously,
it was bad.
I mean, and look, things could still straighten out a little bit, but you look at that conference, and Florida looks like they're going to be a bit down from what they were last year, and really just in several previous years. The preseason rankings in the conference, at least by KenPom standards, Florida gets a lot of residuals from what they had last year, and then the next highest ranked team is Arkansas at 46. And they're like the only other really decent tournament possibility at this stage.
And they sweated a little bit today. I don't know if you caught. They won convincingly, but they were sweating today against, was it Alabama State?
Who are you talking about, Arkansas?
Yeah.
I don't think they didn't play. Okay, they did play today. I'm sorry. They won by 18. I didn't see most of the game, I'll be honest.
Yeah.
They did beat a team by 18 points and dropped back a spot in the KenPom ranking. Yeah. So that's hard to do. But then you go beyond that. I mean, Anthony Grant's under fire at Alabama. Mark Fox is under fire at Georgia. A&M, I think they have to have a better season than they had last year, just by virtue of just the regression effects. Yeah. And then you get down beyond that point, and there's just no signs of life, and it does make you wonder what exactly we should be expecting. 3 bids is going to be probably it, and it's funny because Kentucky is going to struggle a bit simply because they're not going to have very many games against decent competition once they get done with December, because they're going to be playing SEC teams the whole rest of the season. And obviously that didn't hurt them too much this past year, but you do wonder with a team that's flying high, as maybe a top 5 team, which you expect Kentucky to be, if being in a less competitive conference does come back to bite them in the actual tournament itself.
Hey, yeah. Galen, I don't have a 10-second live read sponsored by Chad Sherwood. I feel it's appropriate to mention Auburn as a candidate here for the NCAA tournament. He is really on this Auburn bandwagon. I don't share his sentiments, but I figured I would give him a little bit of a bone here and throw that out there.
I mean, here's the thing with Auburn, and I'm curious to get both of your guys' thoughts on this. I mean, I like Bruce Pearl. I like the idea of him revitalizing Auburn basketball, or maybe just vitalizing Auburn basketball. I mean, it hasn't been vital in at least a decade, maybe a decade and a half. But man, they struggled mightily in that game against Milwaukee on Friday night. I did watch the majority of that game, and that's not a great Milwaukee team. And Milwaukee,
No, it's not a great Milwaukee team.
That Milwaukee team probably should have won that game. Like, I mean, they collapsed in the final 10 minutes, but that was their game to lose.
Yeah, and it's not a good Milwaukee team. I mean, furthermore, it's a Milwaukee team that is not eligible for the postseason at all. I mean, so again, they don't have that same sense of pride to play for. I think Bruce Pearl is a fantastic coach. I, for one, am actually happy to see him back in the game. I think it's good for the game, good for the conference, certainly good for Auburn. But I think that saying John Wooden could not go into Auburn and just turn them around overnight, I don't think. I mean, he doesn't have the personnel yet that he needs to make this a team that's going to land solidly inside the bubble. If they do it, I mean, props to Chad. He's the only one that seems to think that they will among us, and maybe he's right. I mean, he and Lee have gone out. Generally, I think someone is not right when I don't agree with them. That's generally a safe barometer, but sometimes they are.
We can give this close call they had in Milwaukee. We'll give this the benefit of the doubt and just say that the players were overly emotional trying to win against coach's old team. So we'll pass that one. We'll shrug it off for right now.
I mean, were these kids even in high school when Bruce Pearl coached it? I mean, had they been born yet when Bruce Pearl was coaching it? I mean, these are legitimate questions. I think we have to ask.
05, they were about 10 years old, I think.
Okay, so maybe they had just started playing AAU ball. Maybe. I mean, if you're at Milwaukee, maybe you didn't even play AAU ball. I'm not sure. But anyway, and obviously there was one other game that was mildly interesting, well, two actually. Fairleigh Dickinson beat St. Joe's, which, man, that's St. Joe's was not probably going to the tournament anyway, but that's really a poor look. And then Portland State knocks off US 68. Andy Enfield era, it's not working at this stage. That's probably not what they were planning on doing at the start of this second season for him.
Right. So again,
I feel like if Galen had time to prepare for this segment, we'd be going back in time right now, because I feel like we had discussions about Andy Enfield on this.
We did.
Subject.
Yeah. So
now, David, you had mentioned something that we wanted to talk about beforehand, which was in the NFL. They start off their season, they have a Thursday night game, and there's all this pomp and circumstance, and it leads nicely into the Sunday games. And then, obviously, you look at opening day in baseball, and that's a big deal. You look at the way that, some of the other sports, the NBA does a great job of starting things off. College sports in general do an awful job of getting things going. College football I mean, you get a few good games over the course of the weekend, and the ones that happen before that generally aren't that good. But college basketball, it's just like someone someone decides to roll a rock down a hill, and eventually it hits a good game. But it takes a while for that rock to actually get to the good games to hit. And it's frustrating because for a sport that desperately needs positive pub and people watching it and people paying attention, there just seems to be no concerted, coordinated effort to make the start of the basketball season something special. And we talk about this. It seems like almost like it's getting worse every year rather than better.
Right, and again, one of the things, it's just college football, you don't get a lot of showcase games in the first week, but you get enough to make it interesting. That, and with it being week one and football being the festival atmosphere that it is as the fan experience, it's sort of a welcome back to campus extravaganza. College basketball, literally, now it gets there, like you said. I mean, it gets to a fever pitch, but it starts off with a mere flicker of interest, if that. So much so that unless you live in Kentucky, Louisville, Indiana, North Carolina, some places like that, you could walk into a sports bar on Friday night. There'd be basketball on TV, and you'd be like, "Oh, wait, college basketball started." I mean, it's played in front of half-empty arenas. It's a lot of uninteresting matchups, and it is really frustrating. And I think the matchups have a lot to do with it. I think that's a big piece. If you look at Georgia Tech, Georgia, for instance, I don't know if you caught any of that. These are two teams that aren't really expected to do much, but they filled that arena. It was a great atmosphere, and that's what opening night should be: exciting. We're undefeated. Let's go. Instead, even major programs like are playing in half-empty arenas for their first couple of games. It just does not start off big.
Well, Kyle, how much of this do you think is simply college coaches being a bit craven about not wanting to play against a good team to start with? I mean, all these teams that are in this, this tip-off thing going on in Indianapolis, for instance. You got Kentucky, you got Kansas, you got Duke, you got Michigan State. I think those are the 4 teams that are in that. And, they're all going to play at least 1, if not 2, relative cream puffs prior to that. And it seems like, you've got good team going against good team. Why not just have them start against each other rather than having Duke kind of tiptoe into the game after blowing out Presbyterian and Fairfield? Why must we have this padding going into these contests?
Well, I mean, of course, there is some padding going on. I mean, if you're a coach, you'd like to build up a 6-0 or 7-0 record before you're facing any of real substance. So, I mean, certainly that's a part of it. But I also think that the powers that be with the NCAA and the athletic directors, and I mean, if they're already going up against football for people's attention span for the first month of the season. I mean, you've got to be creative and think outside the box. Like one of the things I've always said, and I know David Griggs agrees with me, which is scary, is maybe move exempt season at the start of the year. If you want to play an exempt event, it has to be in the first 2 weeks of the year. Because what that would do is that would force some of these showcases, some of these events, and some of the the round robins and these types of things. It would make them all be in the first 2 weeks of the season, and then all of a sudden you're forced to play some good competition early on. I really think that's part of it. Is they just need to think outside the box, because surely the coaches are not going to stand up and do it themselves.
But we know more than anyone how worthless those games are. Like when we sit down and we look at the year, those bye games, whatever you want to call them, and a few of them are interesting. Most of them are pointless. You have everything to lose. You're blowing out a team. It's way down on the bottom of your profile when you're evaluating the wins and losses. And it's just, I mean, I hate that the season begins this way. I hate that it's so little fanfare, so little attention, and that even big teams with big followings are playing in front of a half-empty building. Because who wants to go see that except us? And I don't even think we want to see that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I haven't been in any games so far. And
look at Friday night. The top two storylines of the night were Daddy Patino against Son Patino, and the second biggest story was basically Presbyterian College losing their religion because they got thumped by Tyrus Jones and Jaleel Okafor of Duke. I mean, that was the second biggest story of the night. I mean, it's just. It was just a depressing start to the season.
Yeah, I just think ultimately it doesn't do the sport any good, and I would really like to see somebody, whether it's the coaches or whether it's the athletic directors or somebody even in the conferences saying, look, we need, if we really want people to get excited about college basketball, we need to start doing things to promote the sport. We need to make it more visible. The NCAA is, you mentioned it. They're petrified about going up against football, but they're going to have that problem anyway. Like, the only way you're not going to be going up against football in some form, frankly, is if you start the season in January. Which personally, as we've talked about, I'd be fine with if they started it that late. That's not that big of a deal. But they don't seem to be interested in doing that, and they don't seem to be interested in doing anything to make the November start date anywhere close to special. And as we keep going with this, it just makes me wonder if we will ever get to a point where somebody will step forward and say, look, Here's a plan of action. Let's try to make it happen. Given the way that college sports goes, I would almost bet that will never happen.
Probably not, and it seems to be digressing. I remember for years when it was a 27 game schedule, or 28 counting the conference tournament. Now it's a 29 to 30. When they added those two games, they pushed the start of the season back from the Friday before Thanksgiving to the second Friday in November. I really think it would have been better off had they added the 2 weeks or the week on to the end of the season rather than the beginning. It seems like when you started later on that date, it did a little bit better, and you're into your exempt tournaments right away, which by design create interesting matchups.
Right.
Now it's just a week. We got some good games coming up this week. I know we're going to get to that a little better, but opening week 1 of the college basketball season, it's just blah. I mean, it really is.
Well, and maybe we could go ahead and talk about the games upcoming because we've talked about this issue as much as we can, but you do have some good games tomorrow. Starting this upcoming week. Obviously, the ranked matchup, Southern Methodist taking on Gonzaga. I give Larry Brown a lot of credit with this SMU team. He's taking them to Spokane, which is not an easy place to play. He's taking them to Indiana. That's actually a game I'm going to be seeing here in a little while. I'm going to be going to that game. He's taking them to Ann Arbor. And, of course, the reason why he's doing this is that his team was not selected for the NCAA tournament last year. And he's like, all right, if that's how it's going to be, then I guess we'll schedule all these things.
And you know what? Good for him and good for the NCAA, yes.
No, I think it's great. I'm not, for me, I think SMU, I think it's going to make them a better team. And I think that, obviously, being in the AAC, they're going to need that extra strength of schedule anyway to compensate for the lack of strength in that conference. But this is an intriguing matchup. A lot of people have been talking this Gonzaga team up quite a bit, Kyle. When you look at these two teams, who do you think has the chance to go farther in terms of like tournament play and so forth at the end of the season?
I mean, I'm not on the SMU bandwagon. I like Gonzaga in this game. I think that they've got, not just in this game, but to answer your question long term, I really like this Gonzaga roster, the way it's constructed. They don't have as much firepower as they've had in some of the recent teams, but they've got a very balanced roster. They've got guards, they've got physical forwards, they've got bigs, they've got athletic wings. They've got a little bit of everything. I don't think that they're going to have a lot of firepower, so I'm not sure that they're going to ever be a top 10 team. But I just like them a little better more in March than this SMU team. To be honest, I'm not buying the Mustangs as much as other people are. I think they'll be a tournament team. I'm not buying them as a top 20 or top 25 team. I'm certainly not buying them as a Final Four contender, as I've heard one of our colleagues and some other people try to tout them as.
Who touted them as a Final Four team among our colleagues?
Chad. He's got them on too.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Chad. Okay, interesting. Well, I've missed a lot apparently. Got Miami at Florida. Interesting test here, David Griggs, as far as Florida is concerned, to see how good this team really is. And Miami might be a sneaky, decent team in the ACC this year.
Right, they've got a lot of new players that should help them out a lot. God, they couldn't possibly be any worse than last year, and they are very well coached. I still think they're probably in over their heads. This Florida team's probably not nearly as good as what we're used to seeing. I could see Miami ending up inside the bubble. This is the kind of game that looks really good on a resume if they're able to get it. And it's a statement game probably to themselves and to the country, too, that they can play. It's a big game. It's the kind of game you want to see early in the season. Would have been great to see this Friday night.
Kyle, on Tuesday, a really important game in college basketball history, Ohio State hosting Marquette in Shaka Smart's debut as the head basketball coach for the Warriors. This is going to be really fascinating.
Yeah, I don't know if this Ohio State team is ready to handle havoc. They're certainly not going to be prepared for havoc. Oh gosh.
That's an inside joke, folks. We apologize.
Yes.
But no,
very inside joke. And we'll never live that down all year.
No, but no, it is a new coaching staff, and this is a Marquette team that is probably going to be a little bit lost, given that, I mean, but the Buzz Williams era ended rather abruptly, and there's some stuff left in the cupboard, but you're not talking about a team that people are looking at really and saying, oh, you're definitely going to be in the tournament this year. But as far as Ohio
Not
State is
like last year,
right,
because at this point everyone was looking at them and saying they're definitely going to be in the tournament.
right.
And they started off big and then tapered off, and I think this year they're going to start off mediocre and taper off.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But Kyle, Ohio State, an interesting mix of experienced players and newcomers. Obviously, D'Angelo Russell, a guy that a lot of people are going to be looking at. But you've got Shannon Scott back, you got Sam Thompson back. Ohio State, I've heard, is kind of the consensus number 2 pick in the Big Ten this year. Are you in agreement on that?
From what I've seen so far, and seeing Michigan State's performance against Navy the other day, which was not very good, by the way, for those that missed it.
Let's be fair. That was not Michigan State's performance against Navy. That was Ed DeChellis's performance against Michigan State. Okay.
I just blamed it on the triple option attack. Because nobody against that.
As an IU football fan, I'm still a little bit bitter on that. So let's not discuss that. Thanks.
No, in reality, though, from what I've seen so far, I mean, I think Ohio State probably is rightful number 2 on paper. Russell, you mentioned him. I mean, from what I've seen thus far of him, I mean, this guy is probably going to be a legitimate Big Ten Player of the Year candidate this year. I mean, he for a freshman, he looks unbelievably polished. Ohio State has about 4 or 5 shooters this year. That's more than shooting was their biggest issue last year. The defense is going to be a little bit of a question mark, especially on the back line. They're playing a 2-3 zone right now, as opposed to the man defense that they've played the last several years. So that's going to be a work in progress. But I think on paper, Ohio State looks like number 2 behind Wisconsin at the moment. To me, I think that's about where they belong.
Okay. David, we have Wichita State traveling to Memphis. This is an intriguing game on Tuesday, and I don't know what to make of either of these teams. Wichita State at 11. I don't know. I mean, I realize they went undefeated last year and they played very well. It still seems a bit high, given the year-to-year up and downs you're probably going to get at a place like Wichita State.
Well, rankings-wise, I bet they finish higher because we know how the rankings work. You move up by default as other teams lose, and I just don't see that many teams challenging them in their conference. I know that they returned a lot. Now, I know they lost probably their best player, but a lot of other team players are back. And it's a team that didn't lose a game last year and lost on a missed last-second shot to the national runners-up in a game that I think we all expected them to win. Having said that, one of the things we were critical about Wichita with last year was their out-of-conference schedule. They really needed to do a better job scheduling quality out-of-conference games. And here we're seeing the same problem. They're going to Memphis, who is always overrated and who lost to Christian Brothers. I mean, just not a good job of scheduling a quality out-of-conference game.
Well,
I'd high-five myself for the dig it.
This is a very typical Missouri Valley non-conference schedule because if you look at it, New Mexico State, Memphis, Tulsa, Utah, St. Louis, Seton Hall, Alabama, and then even like Detroit on the road. Like these are all games that are designed purely to pump up the RPI. They're not really great games. Utah might be decent. Like Utah actually is ranked, and Utah could be a contender for the Pac-12 title, as weird as that seems. But overall, not a whole lot of really high-level games that Wichita State is playing this year.
And they need this one because I wouldn't be surprised if Memphis missed the tournament this year. I'm just really not a fan.
I don't know.
How do you think Greg Marshall felt when he looked coming into this game this week and realized, hey, wait a minute, we scheduled this Memphis team and they're not ranked? I mean, that had to be a shock, right? I mean, Greg Marshall had to figure he was playing a ranked team because Memphis is always ranked in the first month of the season, and lo and behold, they're not.
I mean, it is kind of bizarre world, which might mean that Memphis, gets a 2 or a 3 seed or something. Who knows?
Yeah. Anyway, the 2 big games on Tuesday: Michigan State taking on Duke, Kansas taking on Kentucky. It seems like the favorite in the Michigan State-Duke game is pretty obvious. I don't know that Michigan State is going to struggle in that game anywhere close to the way that they struggled against Navy. But they also don't appear to have the same level of personnel that they've had the last few years, and Duke has looked really darn good, granted against pretty weak competition so far.
I
As
fell into
far
this.
as
I fell into this trap last year, but because I said the same thing and it didn't work out so well. But this Duke team really does look explosive right now.
they
I know they
do,
looked last year, but yeah, they look amazing at the moment.
yeah. And they looked explosive last year. They hung 111 points on a pretty good Davidson team in the first game, and they turn around and lost by 11 to Kansas. And it's hard to peg this Duke team these days because for whatever reason, Krzyzewski has oddly enough proven very ineffective at getting his guys to play consistently good defense. I mean, and they're up 1 year, they're down 1 year. Last year they were way down. I mean, they were not even a top 100 defense. So we'll have to wait and see. Now, I will say I don't think Michigan State's the sort of team that's going to test them significantly defensively. I mean, they just don't have this consistent scoring that you would want to see. So we may not find out much about Duke until much later on in the season. But anyway, David, the other game, obviously Kentucky versus Kansas. This line change thing that Calipari's doing is, well, it didn't look like it was working particularly well today. I don't know if you saw much of the game that they played against Buffalo, but they did not look like a particularly coherent squad out there.
No, it's hard to do that in basketball, I think. I understand the thought process. It's just I could see it not working very well. But then again, it's hard to prepare for as well. I really like this Kansas team. I like Kentucky. I mean, I think they're pretty young. I like them more than I've liked them the last couple years, but I just don't think. I think in the end they're going to be there. I just don't think they're there yet. I think Kansas gets this one.
Did you have a 40-0 T-shirt left over from last year where you could just change the season on there?
No, that's one thing I don't have.
That's too bad.
Yes.
I don't have one either. I wish I'd picked one up. Outside of that, not a whole lot else going on in this first week. You got on Wednesday, Oklahoma traveling to Creighton. That one could be somewhat interesting, and it's on national television, which is nice. Thursday of this week, as we mentioned earlier on, you have Southern Methodist traveling to Indiana, which it could be a good one. It's going to be interesting to see exactly what sort of team Indiana is, because that's the team some people seem to think might do well. It's a team that some people think is going to do terribly. And I think either eventuality is perhaps just as likely. Thursday, Texas travels to Iowa. Iowa needing to pick up the pieces a certain degree after what should have been a kind of a culmination season for Fran McCaffrey and company didn't quite work out last year. You've got Syracuse versus Cal as Conzo Martin tries to get things going there in the Bay Area, and then wrapping up the week leading into the weekend, you've got not much really. You've got some rando games involving some ranked teams, but nothing really that speaks to the heart in terms of overall matchups. So. Guys, we head in from that point to some of the exempt tournaments, and obviously some things to look forward to there. Yeah. But that at least we've got some top 25 matchups the first week. I guess we can thank somebody in the schedule making department for that.
You actually missed one on Tuesday that I think is a really appealing matchup. You mentioned Utah earlier. They play San Diego State on Tuesday.
Yeah, you're right. I did miss that. I saw that earlier. Yeah, that's a great Mountain West Conference matchup. I mean,
it really is. I mean, those two.
It's
odd
it's
that
just,
they play this early.
What's really strange is I could talk myself mentally into San Diego State being in the Pac-12. Utah in the Pac-12 still has not sunk in with me in either football or basketball.
Me neither. Sometimes I forget that they're in the Pac-12.
Yeah.
I don't know why I forget things like that.
Yeah. Well, anyway,
I'd like to forget that too.
Yeah, probably. They look good though. I think they could be a pretty decent team. Anyway, any final thoughts before we wrap things up today, guys?
Well, just again, you kind of wish that there were more good matchups early in the season, and when there's one matchup in particular. Missouri played UMKC, almost. But if Missouri were to play Kansas on opening night, I think that would be phenomenal.
Oh, jeez.
I think that's what needs to happen. I don't. I mean, how
Kyle,
can we
any final thoughts from
I
you?
wasn't finished yet.
I gotta say, this is
I
very
wasn't finished.
smart of David. He waited to the very end, so if he got put on mute, it wouldn't matter because it was his final thought anyway.
Well, I thought he was hosting, I can't put him on mute because I don't have any controls over the program. So there
Boy,
you
Dave,
go.
I really snuck this one by you then tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got a
Anyway,
hand.
All right. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm really interested. I think I think so many times we fall into this mantra about whether or not there's a dominant team in college basketball. I'm sure some cream will rise to the top this year, but I think it's going to be from what I see in the early going. I think it's going to be a very healthy college basketball season. There's some talent out there. There's some good teams. I think it's going to be a deep season. I really think the top 10, top 20 is going to be very strong this year. So just early returns, but I think the season looks very promising.
It should be fun. It should be a season. I mean, I think there's a lot of unknowns, and I kind of prefer these years to. But then again, last year we thought everything was pretty set. We thought we knew who the top teams were going to be at the start of the year, and not only did that not end up being the case, but we ended up with maybe the biggest surprise national champion that we've had in the last 15 years. I mean, it's so. It seems like the years where we think we're going to have a lot of chaos and uncertainty, we end up not having much of that at all, and then vice versa in the other year. So I don't know. I'm curious to see what happens with this season. It could be quite fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if UConn finds a way to win it again this year, I'm going to shoot myself.
Well,
Don't do that. I'll shoot you for you.
oh, goodness. All right. Well, I think that'll wrap it up. Thanks for tuning in this week, folks. We'll catch you again sometime here very soon. And be sure to stay tuned to Hoops HD. Follow us on Twitter at Hoops HD, and check out the website hoopshd.com for all the information regarding college basketball that you need. For David Griggs and for Kyle Lamb, I'm Galen Clavio. Thanks for joining us. We'll catch you on the flip side.